My name is Eliza, and I want to tell you about the day my own father tried to erase me from existence with a single sentence in front of 50 engineers, soldiers, and staff I once led with pride. He didn't call me by name. He called me a failure. Not behind closed doors, not in a private reprimand, but in the war room with a pointed finger and a roaring voice that shattered more than just protocol. That moment should have destroyed me. But it didn't. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had already survived something far worse growing up invisible in a house where loyalty only flowed one way, and my worth was measured by how useful I was to the legacy of men. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's about silent survival and the quiet power of building something unbreakable when the world tries to tear you down. Before I take you inside that war room and everything that happened after, I want to ask, where are you watching from and how old were you when someone first tried to write you out of your own story? Hit subscribe to Subtle Revenge Stories so you don't miss the rest of what happened next. I remember the chill in the air that morning. It wasn't from the air conditioning. It was something else, something colder. The steel door of the war room at White Sands hissed shut behind me, locking me in with 50 people I used to call colleagues. But that day, they looked at me like a virus had just walked in. No greetings, no nods. Just 50 pairs of eyes turning toward me in perfect unison like predators spotting weakness. The silence in that room wasn't quiet, it was a living thing. It had weight, teeth, and intention. I heard the whispers. That's her General Thorne's daughter. The one who blew up the Chimera prototype. I kept my back straight, chin up, eyes forward. But inside I was splintering. The click of my regulation heels on the polished concrete felt like gunshots. It was the sound of walking on broken glass. I wasn't there to beg for forgiveness. I was there to fix what no one else could. And then I saw him, my father. General Marcus Thorne stood like a monument next to the main holoscreen, which pulsed with red warnings from the failing Chimera system. He didn't acknowledge me. Not with a glance. Not even a shift in posture. He let me stand there under the spotlight of collective scorn for exactly 15 seconds. I counted each one. When he finally turned his eyes, my eyes raked over me like I was defective hardware. Then he laughed. It wasn't humor. It was performance. His laugh was a weapon detonated to strip me of dignity in front of every engineer, officer, and soldier in the room. It echoed off the walls like a shot fired at close range. When it finally died, silence fell again, heavier this time. Then he said it. 4 words. Who allowed this failure in here? He didn't use my name. Not even my rank. He used a noun, failure. In that moment, my entire identity, my 15 years of decorated service, my nights solving equations no one else could touch, they all evaporated under that label. My father, the man who had once placed my West Point ring on my finger with pride, now pointed at me like I was a threat to national security. And beside him, his golden boy Julian Caldwell stood smirking like he was watching a puppet dance on command. I stood frozen, not because I didn't know what to say, but because if I had opened my mouth, I might have screamed. Have you ever stood in a room where you weren't just unwelcome? You were unwanted by design, where the people who once respected you now saw you as a cautionary tale. Tell me, have you ever been erased like that while still breathing? I want to know, how old were you when someone who should have lifted you up tried to bury you instead? Just when I thought the shame couldn't cut any deeper, the door hissed open again. A soft sound, barely audible over the silence, but it sliced through the tension like a scalpel. Every head in the room turned not toward me this time, but toward the figure who stepped in. She was small, almost unremarkable at first glance. A salt and pepper bun, dark-tailored pantsuit, no medals, no flash. But her presence, it landed like a thunderclap. She walked straight toward my father, her steps unhurried but unwavering, the kind of stride that didn't ask for permission. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father blink. Actually, General, she said, her voice soft and steady, yet cold enough to freeze the desert outside, I authorized the project's original designer to be here. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The room responded to her authority like it had been wired to it from birth. Your incident, she continued, is now my problem. And I don't tolerate circuses. That wasn't a statement. That was a verdict. General Marcus Thorne's face, my father's face, drained of color. His jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. She had stripped him of his command without even needing to raise her volume. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew power when I saw it. Her words didn't lift me, they shielded me. Like a steel wall sliding into place between me and the next blow. For the first time that morning, I breathed. Not just air, but something deeper like permission. The moment was brief, almost surgical, but I held onto it like oxygen. This stranger had done what no one in my family had ever done. She stood between me and the storm. And she did it without fanfare, without performance, without needing anything in return. That kind of protection, unexpected, unearned, and unspoken, was more profound than any applause I'd ever received. And in that instant, I remembered something my uncle once told me. The right people don't need to raise their voices to be heard. This woman, Dr. Helena Vance, I'd later learn, was more than just a senior advisor from the Pentagon. She was a scalpel in a room full of blunt hammers. Her presence didn't just deflect the next humiliation. It cracked the facade my father had spent decades building. Have you ever witnessed someone take the air out of a bully's lungs without ever raising a hand? Have you ever seen someone stand up for you before even knowing your name? If you have, I want to hear about it. And if you haven't, I hope someday you do. The sound of Dr. Vance's voice brought back a memory I had buried so deep I thought it had fossilized. But trauma has a cruel sense of timing. As her words hung in the air, I was no longer in the war room. I was 17 again, standing on a wooden stage at West Point, under a single spotlight that felt hotter than the sun. I had just won first place at the National Science and Engineering Fair for military dependents. My project, a miniaturized inertial guidance system, was something I had built alone in the garage with blistered fingers and sleepless nights. It was messy, complicated, fragile brilliance, and it worked. The thrill of that moment was like lightning. My hands trembled as I accepted the trophy, not out of fear, but joy. Pure, blinding, earned joy. And then they called my father to the stage. Dressed in full military blues medals, gleaming posture, flawless, he looked every bit the war hero. The audience stood. They clapped. He was the picture of honor. He stepped behind the podium, his voice commanding the hall with ease. And then, with the same calm authority he would later use to destroy my career, he pointed toward the audience and said, "This is really a testament to my son, Leo." His leadership kept the team focused. My stomach dropped. Leo. My brother had done nothing. He'd helped me glue some poster boards the night before. He hadn't written a line of code or soldered a single joint. But now the applause was for him. They clapped for the myth. Not the mind that created the machine, but the story they wanted to believe, a clean, polished narrative about teamwork, brotherhood, and a proud father raising two brilliant children. I stood there holding a gold-plated trophy that suddenly felt like lead. I smiled for the cameras. I shook hands. But inside, something shattered. My father hadn't just stolen credit. He had rewritten the story entirely. Afterward, Leo bounced up to me, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "We did it," he said, clapping my shoulder. I wanted to scream. He didn't even realize he had stolen something. Because that's what entitlement looks like when it's taught early. It doesn't feel like theft. It feels like inheritance. Have you ever watched someone walk away with everything you built while the world congratulates them? Have you ever stood frozen on a stage knowing your silence was the price of staying in the family? Tell me, what was the first moment you realized even your greatest victories could be taken from you if the wrong person held the microphone? That night, after the ceremony, I sat alone in the guest barracks assigned for visiting families. The cheap fluorescent light flickered above a desk that was too small for the weight I carried. My trophy sat in front of me, its shine already fading in my eyes. But what truly held my attention was the stack of schematics beside it, hand-drawn every line a battle I had fought against failure. My name was on every page, not Leo's, not my father's, mine. And then there was a knock, soft, hesitant. I didn't look up when the door opened, but I knew that silhouette. Uncle David, my mother's brother, a senior engineer at NASA, always tired, always quiet, and always without fail showing up when no one else did. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over, sat beside me, and laid one weathered hand on top of my schematics. It was such a simple gesture, but it meant everything. No speeches, no pity, just respect. Then in that low rumble of a voice that always reminded me of distant thunder, he said, "They can applaud the story, Eliza. But the machine doesn't lie. And you built the truth." He looked at me with eyes that saw through everything. Never forget you're an engine whisperer. You hear things others can't. I didn't cry. I couldn't. But something inside me shifted. It was like he placed a steel beam into the foundation of my soul. Quiet, strong, unshakable. That night, he didn't fix the wound. But he gave me something more important, a fortress. A place inside myself no one could touch. A legacy not built on applause, but on equations, vibrations, and the language of machines. I carried that with me for years. Through deployments, through promotions, through long nights staring at schematics with bloodshot eyes. It was my armor. Not the uniform, not the medals. Just the memory of one man telling me without doubt that I was more than enough. Have you ever had someone see the real you? Not the version others celebrate? Not the one others fear, but the one you are when all the noise fades. And if so, do you still remember what they said? Because I do. Word for word. In the quietest room of my life, it became the loudest truth I ever heard. The fortress my uncle helped me build was strong, but it didn't pay the rent. When I walked away from the military after the Chimera disaster, I wasn't just leaving behind a career. I was leaving behind everything that had once defined me. The uniform, the rank, the structure, even the illusion of approval. I took every dollar I had and poured it into a corrugated metal garage on the edge of Las Cruces, New Mexico. It wasn't much. Just a box in the desert. No air conditioning, barely any insulation, and walls that groaned in the wind. But it was mine. Garage 17. My empire of dust tools and stubborn old engines. In the summer it baked like an oven. In winter I could see my breath. The scent of burned oil motor grease and bitter coffee became my daily incense. My companions were a battered Craftsman tool set and a tiny radio that only picked up old country stations. I fixed anything that came through the door. Chili farm water pumps, rusted tractors, generators older than I was. It was honest work, and for the first time in my life, no one could take credit for it but me. Still, every new client came in wearing the same look, a mix of doubt and quiet dismissal. I was just a small blonde woman in dirty coveralls, tired eyes, and a wrench in hand. They saw someone who didn't belong near machinery. One rancher tossed his truck keys onto my workbench with a loud clatter. "Break it more than it already is," he muttered, "and I'm not paying you a dime." I didn't argue. I nodded and got to work. 12 straight hours later, my hands were bleeding from a slipped wrench, and my face was streaked with grease. But when I turned the key, that engine didn't just start, it roared. Smooth, strong, like it remembered what it had been built to do. The rancher stared, looked at me, then back at the truck. The disbelief on his face was worth more than the wad of cash he left behind without a word. I didn't need thanks. That sound, the perfect hum of something coming back to life, was all the validation I needed. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't public. But it was mine. Have you ever done something no one thought you could without an audience, without applause, just you, your work, and the quiet truth of knowing you were right all along? Because those are the victories that matter most. The ones that whisper instead of shout. The ones that stay with you. Even now. It came on a Tuesday. I had just finished reassembling a transmission that had fought me tooth and nail for 2 days. My back ached. My hands were scraped raw. I was sitting on the dusty floor of Garage 17, leaning against a stack of worn tires, sipping a lukewarm can of Coors, the champagne of people who work with their hands when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, not expecting much. Maybe a parts delivery confirmation, maybe an overdue invoice. But what I saw made me sit upright. The sender's address was a string of numbers and letters heavily encrypted. No name, no subject line. Just a single sentence in the body of the email. We have a technical problem. We require your consultation. Discretion is absolute. A car will collect you tomorrow at 800. That was it. No pleas, no details. Just a digital whisper in the middle of the desert. Every rational part of me screamed that this was a bad idea. I hadn't touched a military-grade system since the Chimera fallout. I wasn't a consultant anymore. I was a mechanic with grease under her nails and a tax bill coming due. But there was something about that message. Something in the cold, confident tone that didn't ask, it commanded. I recognized the cadence. It was the way operators spoke when time was running out. More than that, it woke something in me. The part I'd buried. The part that used to solve the unsolvable. I stared at the message for a full 5 minutes. Then I typed a single word, confirmed. The next morning, exactly at 8:00, a black unmarked SUV rolled up to the edge of my property. Tinted windows, silent engine, no plates. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave a note. I wiped the last bit of grease from my hands, locked the garage, and stepped into the back seat. We drove deep into the Chihuahuan desert, far from cell service civilization and certainty. The road disappeared beneath us. The landscape turned strange scrubland, giving way to something bleaker, almost lunar. Finally, we stopped in front of what looked like a derelict cattle ranch. Sagging wood dust-covered fences, a windmill that hadn't turned in years. But I wasn't fooled. The high-tech surveillance cameras tucked beneath the eaves told a different story. And when the door opened, she was waiting. Salt and pepper bun. Sharp eyes. Authority in every fiber. "Helena," she said, holding out her hand. Her grip was firm. Her gaze unwavering. "We have an engine that won't talk. I hear you're the one who can make machines speak. Have you ever stepped back into a world you thought you'd left behind, only to realize it had never truly left you? Tell me, if a ghost from your past knocked on your door, would you open it? Or would you pretend not to hear?" Helena didn't bother with pleasantries. She led me past the decaying barn facade and through a steel-reinforced door hidden behind a false wall. On the other side was a shock to the senses. The air changed. The smell of dust and cattle was instantly replaced with the sterile crispness of a clean room. The temperature dropped. The silence grew dense. I followed her down a long corridor lined with fiber optic cables and biometric scanners until we entered a lab that looked like it had been built inside a mountain, and maybe it was. At the center of the room sat a testing cradle. Mounted in it was something I hadn't seen in years, an advanced engine prototype based on DARPA schematics. But this wasn't just a model. It was alive in the way only a machine on the edge of failure can be. There was something fragile in the way it sat, like a wounded animal waiting to be understood. "Everyone says it's dead." Helena said, her tone even. "They've run the numbers patched. The software replaced the components. Nothing works." What do you think? I didn't answer her. I couldn't. My feet carried me forward before my mind caught up. My hand reached out slow and reverent. I rested my fingers on the cold metal casing. It hummed faint and erratic. I closed my eyes. I didn't read the diagnostics on the screen. I listened. Not with my ears, but with that deeper part of me. The part Uncle David had nurtured. The part the military had tried to stamp out. And I heard it. A stutter. A hesitation in the vibration pattern. A tiny misalignment in the fuel injection timing so minuscule it fell within acceptable tolerance on every graph. But it wasn't acceptable. It was out of tune, like a violin with one string just barely off. It wasn't broken, it was resisting. I opened my eyes and turned back to Helena. "You're not looking at the right thing," I said. "It's not a failure. It's a miscommunication." I spent the next 48 hours in that lab. No sleep, barely ate, just me, a stack of blank schematics, and the machine. I didn't try to fix it. I tried to understand it. I rewrote the control logic not to force compliance, but to translate its language. And when I was ready, I laid my sketches in front of Helena. She sat across the table, studying me with a quiet intensity. When I finished my explanation, she didn't blink. She simply said, "You're not just a mechanic. You're having a conversation with it." And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Truly seen. Have you ever had someone recognize a part of you? Even you had forgotten existed. That moment when they look past your titles, your failures, your walls, and they see the way your mind actually works. If you have, tell me, what did it unlock in you? 3 days after I touched that engine, Helena slid a thick folder across the table. Inside was a government-issued consultant contract with the Pentagon's seal and a classified clearance badge clipped to the corner. But that wasn't what made my breath catch. It was her words. "The Chimera project is failing," she said, her voice low and measured. "And I don't want you to return as a scapegoat or a daughter. I want you back as the best damn engineer I've seen in 2 decades. I stared at her, unsure if I was breathing. No one had ever spoken to me like that, not without condition, not without the shadow of someone else's reputation trailing behind me. She continued almost gently. "Your original schematics were never wrong. I've reviewed them. The explosion 3 years ago. It wasn't your design. It was altered by someone else." My chest tightened. My father's voice echoed in my memory, laced with disdain. Too ambitious. Too risky. I refined it. I had heard those words before, but hearing Helena say it without accusation, without pity, transformed them. They became evidence. Not a theory. Not paranoia. Evidence. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a single duffel bag, locked garage 17, and drove alone under the New Mexico stars. I didn't know what waited for me at White Sands. I didn't know if I was walking into a trap or a reckoning, but I knew I wasn't the same woman who had left 3 years ago, broken and silent. This time, I wasn't arriving with a title. I wasn't arriving for forgiveness. I was arriving with clarity. When I stepped onto the base, the silence was different than before. It wasn't hostile, it was confused. The kind of silence that follows a rumor that might be true. No one greeted me, no one offered a handshake, but no one dared look away either. Word had traveled fast. Dr. Vance had sent me, not as a courtesy, but as a mandate. My father, still stationed there, couldn't publicly oppose it. So he sent the next best thing, a chill that passed through the ranks like frostbite. I wasn't welcome, and everyone made sure I felt it. The first technical meeting was scheduled within 24 hours. I walked in, sat down, and opened my notes. I didn't speak first. I waited. And when I did begin to explain the anomalies I had detected in the prototype, Julian Caldwell cut me off. "With all due respect, Miss Caton," he said, stressing the word with a smirk, "your, intuitive methods might work on broken tractors, but we operate on data here. Hard science, not feelings." I didn't flinch. I didn't return the insult. I just looked at him, steady and unbothered. "The data isn't lying, Caldwell," I said, voice even. "You're just asking the wrong questions. Have you ever had to return to the place that broke you, not to beg for your name back, but to prove it never should have been erased? I want to know, if you were given that chance, would you take it? Or would you let the silence keep winning?" That night, back in my temporary quarters, a sterile box with a cot, a desk, and not a single ounce of comfort, my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked, but I didn't need to guess. It was my father. I answered not out of curiosity but readiness. His voice wasn't the roar from the war room. It was measured, calm, and laced with that condescending brand of fatherly concern I knew too well. "Eliza," he began smooth as silk, "I hear you're causing some friction with Caldwell's team." There it was. The polite framing of a threat. "You're digging up things that were settled 3 years ago. It's counterproductive. You're just a consultant now." An outside voice. "Let the team do their work." I stared at the wall, my jaw clenched. He wasn't giving advice, he was building a box and trying to fold me into it. "My place," I said slowly, "is as the person who designed the system you're failing to fix. And I know it was altered." There was a pause. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it told me everything. When he responded, the warmth was gone. "I refined it," he snapped. "Your design was too ambitious, too dangerous. I made it more practical, more stable. Don't make this worse with your professional arrogance." That wasn't explanation. That was gaslighting. In his version of reality, he wasn't a saboteur. He was a savior. I was the liability. The ungrateful child who didn't know better. I ended the call without another word. And before I could even set the phone down, it rang again. My mother. I shouldn't have picked up, but some wounded part of me still hoped. Maybe this time she'd ask how I was. Maybe she'd surprise me. Instead, her voice came through in sobs. Manufactured, practiced. "Eliza, what are you doing?" she cried. "Your father is under so much stress. His career, our name, your brother's future. You're tearing it all down." She didn't mention me, not once, just their image, their legacy, their comfort. "Please," she begged, "don't destroy everything we've built. You need to think about your brother, about the family." Her words hit like poison-tipped darts, each aimed at the softest parts of me. She had turned my pursuit of truth into an act of selfishness. She had weaponized family guilt like only a practiced mother can. I stood there frozen. Then something inside me snapped. Not in rage, not in grief, in clarity. "Mom," I said, my voice eerily steady, "the family's honor was destroyed 3 years ago when none of you stood up for the truth." "Eliza, don't you dare take that tone." "I will," I said, cutting her off. "I will take that tone. And I'm done stepping back." I hung up. My hand shook, not from fear, but from something hotter, cleaner. It was the beginning of a fire. Have you ever reached the edge of a lie so big, so old that even love couldn't survive inside it? Tell me when the people who raised you become the ones protecting the lie. What do you choose, peace or truth? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mother's pleas and my father's lies still echoed in my ears, but they were no longer heavy. They were fuel. My body was exhausted, but my mind was on fire. I sat in front of the secure terminal they'd assigned me, the soft green glow of the screen, lighting the dark room like a lantern in a cave. I wasn't a consultant anymore. I wasn't a disgraced officer or an obedient daughter. I was an investigator, a soldier, a woman on a mission to exhume the truth they tried to bury. I didn't need to break into classified systems. I wasn't reckless. What I needed was buried deeper in the shadows most people never think to search. I began crawling through the base's long-forgotten archives, backup directories, maintenance caches, error logs, engineering subfolders so obscure they might as well have been buried under desert sand. I moved like a ghost through the digital bones of Chimera. Quiet, deliberate. I wasn't looking for top-secret documents. I was looking for what gets missed, what gets left behind when men in power think no one's watching. It took hours. My fingers ached. My eyes burned. And then I found it. A folder hidden inside a temporary archive labeled Calibration Reports Q3. Innocuous. Forgettable. but inside was a log that made my blood freeze. My original 6-stage warning system, precise layered, built to give operators time to respond, had been gutted, replaced by a 2-stage protocol. Crude, rushed, dangerous. And there it was. The authorization signature, Marcus Thorne, not a committee, not an engineering board, just him. One override, timestamped 2:03 a.m., 24 hours before the explosion. Alone, deliberate. But that wasn't the worst part. I kept digging, adrenaline driving me past exhaustion. I followed the trail like a predator with the scent of blood. And then one final file. A scanned copy of my original schematic for the thrust vectoring valve. Attached was a note on official letterhead. My father's handwriting, sharp, angular, unmistakable, read, "Positioning altered per recommendation of Chief Engineer Caldwell to increase launch efficiency." Empty. My chest went cold. It was a lie. A calculated, documented lie. Caldwell would never have made that change. It violated basic principles of fluid dynamics. My father didn't just override my work, he created a fake paper trail to blame someone else if it failed. He built my professional coffin and signed another man's name on it. And the explosion. It wasn't a consequence. It was a cover-up. I sat back trembling, my breath shallow. My reflection stared back from the dark monitor, eyes hollow and blazing all at once. In that moment, everything inside me hardened. This wasn't about reputation anymore. It wasn't even about vindication. It was about justice. Quiet, final, precise. Have you ever touched a truth so sharp, so undeniable it cut through every lie you'd ever been told? Tell me, if you had proof that the person who raised you tried to erase you, would you stay silent? Or would you let the world hear what they buried? By dawn, I had everything. The altered protocols, the signature, the handwritten lie, the party invitation dated the day after the explosion celebrating the successful restructuring of the Chimera project. I stared at the drive in my hand. It didn't feel like plastic. It felt like iron. Like a weapon. The sun was rising outside, brushing the white sands with a cruel kind of serenity, while I sat under flickering fluorescent light, building a case like a bomb technician diffusing a live shell. There could be no mistakes, no emotional appeals, no dramatic speeches. I knew how the system worked. I had lived inside it. The truth wasn't enough. It had to be bulletproof. I opened a fresh project file on my secure laptop and began laying it out, every log, every timestamp, every connection. I created a chronological map of deceit. From the override command to the forged memo. From the explosion to the celebration. From my resignation to my exile. Every thread wove back to the same two men, General Marcus Thorne and Julian Caldwell. I wasn't just organizing data. I was building a story. But not the kind my father had always manipulated to fit his legacy. This story would be different. It wouldn't require charisma or rank or authority. It would rely on something my father could never control, pure engineering logic. The kind of truth that machines understood. The kind that couldn't be shouted down or rebranded. Machines don't lie. That had always been my gospel. And now I would let the ghost of Chimera speak for itself. By noon, I had everything indexed and encrypted, but I knew data alone wasn't enough. In the world of men like my father, facts are just opinions in another suit. What I needed was a visual, something undeniable, something that spoke in the language engineers' respected schematics. So I found an empty briefing room, one with a massive whiteboard stretching wall to wall. I stood in front of it, dry erase marker in hand. The cap clicked off with the kind of finality that feels like pulling a trigger. I drew. Not fast, not carelessly. Every line had a purpose. I recreated the original Chimera design from memory down to the micro-loop coolant channels and harmonic feedback filters. My hand moved like it had done this 1,000 times because it had. I drew the logic tree for the 6-stage alert protocol, the one my father had dismantled in the dark. And when I was done, I signed it Eliza M. Caton. No rank, no title. Just my name, my claim, my proof. That board wasn't just a drawing. It was a silent accusation 10 feet wide and unerasable. A monument of defiance in the language my father had always used to erase me engineering. Have you ever had to carve your truth into the walls of the very system that tried to silence you? Tell me, if they tried to rewrite your story, would you hand them a pen? Or would you pick up the marker? The next morning, the whiteboard was still there, still untouched, still humming with quiet defiance. I stood before it, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup, waiting for anyone to acknowledge it. And then, right on cue, he arrived. Julian Caldwell. Pressed shirt, polished shoes, that same smug sneer he always wore like a second skin. He stopped in the doorway, arms folded, head tilted just slightly in mock amusement. His eyes moved slowly across the board, tracing the lines, the valves, the annotations. He recognized it immediately. He had studied my design 3 years ago, so he knew exactly what he was looking at. "Still playing with your little drawings, Caton?" He said, his voice syrupy with disdain. "It's cute. Maybe you should go back to tuning up farm equipment." I didn't turn to face him. I just kept adjusting the final subsystem on the board, finishing a loop, smoothing a line. When I was done, I reached for the marker and added one last detail, my signature in the bottom right corner. A signature that had once been removed from every official document. "Not playing," I said quietly. "Reconstructing." Caldwell let out a short, derisive laugh. "You think a whiteboard sketch is going to undo 3 years of progress? We've moved beyond this. Have you?" I asked. "Because the system says otherwise." I could hear his breath hitch just slightly. The confidence faltered, but only for a moment. "You're out of your depth," he said. "We run simulations here, not art shows." I finally turned to face him. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Then let's simulate it." And just like that, the gauntlet was thrown. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to scream to be heard. The whiteboard had already done that. That afternoon, during Dr. Vance's facility review, she entered the room flanked by staff and aides. Her eyes scanned the board, then landed on my signature. She paused. Then she turned to me. "Walk me through it," she said. I did. No slides, no handouts, just the board. Just the language of machines. When I finished, she looked at me, then at her aide. "Schedule a live simulation, this afternoon." Word spread like wildfire. I saw it in the way people avoided my eyes in the hallway. In the sudden shift of silence around me, not hostile anymore, but wary. Uncertain. The way soldiers look at a ghost they thought was buried. They didn't know which side of history I was about to land on. But they knew something was coming. Have you ever watched the moment a lie starts to crack just a little, that tremble before the collapse? Tell me, if you had one chance to show the truth in front of the very people who buried it, would you hesitate? Or would you let the silence do the talking? When I walked into the simulation bay that afternoon, the air was thick. Not just with anticipation, but calculation. This wasn't a test. It was a trap designed with surgical precision by 2 men who thought they still held the script. My father stood at the center of the room, flanked by Julian Caldwell and a handful of carefully selected defense journalists, their cameras already rolling. The whole thing had been framed as a routine technical demonstration, an internal review to assess Chimera's resilience under its refined system. But it wasn't internal, not with the press present. This wasn't about transparency, it was about optics. About crafting a narrative where I would fail again publicly, and they would nod solemnly as if to say, "See? We gave her a chance." I said nothing. I stood to the side, flash drive in hand, my expression unreadable. Caldwell turned toward me and smirked like a magician before the final misdirection. "Miss Caton," he said loudly, handing the lead engineer a cue card. "Let's start by running the current configuration, the one designed for stability and performance." The room darkened as the holoscreen lit up. The Chimera engine's 3D model came to life. At first, the numbers on the telemetry display climbed steadily. Smooth thrust curve, stable coolant temp. My father's jaw tightened in subtle satisfaction. And then the warnings started. One by one, amber turned red. The engine's sound shifted into a mechanical groan, low-labored wrong. At precisely 92 seconds, the simulation triggered a critical failure rotor imbalance. Catastrophic event imminent. Caldwell slammed the emergency stop button like he was saving the day. The room froze. He turned to the journalists with a look of rehearsed weariness. "As you can see," he said, "we're still battling some instability from the original design." My father gave a grave nod, playing his part. The cameras captured everything. The lie was almost complete. Until Dr. Vance spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice slicing through the stage theater like a scalpel. "Now we'll run it again using Major Caton's original configuration." My breath caught. She had used my rank. Not Miss, not consultant, Major. That single word shifted the entire room. I walked forward and handed the encrypted drive to the technician. Caldwell leaned in and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Let's see your ghost dance." The simulation began again. This time the system bucked. Alarms screamed, lights flashed. Even the journalists flinched. To anyone watching, it looked like a disaster. But to me, it was music. "Pause simulation," I said. The room stilled. I stepped forward, hands steady, and made 3 manual adjustments: fuel variance, coolant flow, harmonic feedback. Then I said, "Continue." The alarms began to quiet. Red turned to amber. Amber turned to green. The Chimera engine reached 300 seconds full cycle without a single error. Not just stable, flawless. Better than it had ever performed. The silence in that room was louder than any explosion. Have you ever watched the truth win, not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with quiet, irrefutable brilliance? Tell me if you could silence your critics with nothing but your craft. Would you? The simulation clock ticked down in perfect silence. Every number was clean. Every system readout showed green. The engine's hum virtual, though it was settled into a rhythm so stable it felt like a heartbeat. One that had been ignored, rewritten, almost buried. But now it was undeniable. I didn't smile. I didn't turn for applause. I just stepped back from the console and folded my hands behind my back like I was standing at parade rest. The journalists were the first to move. Their cameras lowered slowly, almost reluctantly, as their expressions shifted from scripted interest to genuine disbelief. And then their lenses turned not toward the simulation screen, but toward the men in the center of the room. Julian Caldwell had gone pale. He didn't blink, didn't speak. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked like he'd seen a ghost, and maybe he had. My father, General Marcus Thorne, stood as still as a statue, his face frozen in a mask of quiet rage and dawning horror. The kind of expression a man wears when he realizes the fortress he's built over a lifetime is crumbling beneath his feet, and there's not a damn thing he can do to stop it. For a full 30 seconds, no one said anything. No one moved. It was as if time itself had paused to watch the balance of power shift. And then slowly, almost imperceptibly, Dr. Vance turned to me and nodded once. That was all I needed. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the second encrypted flash drive, and handed it to her. This, I said quietly, contains the system logs, override signatures, and engineering documentation leading up to the original explosion, along with the fabricated memo linking Caldwell to a change he never authorized. Her eyes didn't widen. Her posture didn't change. but something settled in the room when she took it from me like gravity had returned. "Understood," she said. She didn't need to say more. She turned on her heel and left the room, the journalist stumbling after her in a flurry of movement and whispered questions. The moment they were gone, I turned to Julian. He still hadn't moved. I leaned in just enough for only him to hear me. "You should have listened to the engine," I said. "It was trying to warn you." Then I looked at my father. For the first time, I wasn't searching his face for approval or explanation. I was watching a man unravel quietly, methodically, completely. He didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. His hands were clenched so tightly I could see the tremble in his knuckles. All his medals, all his speeches, all his carefully constructed control, it meant nothing now. Because the machine he tried to bury had risen again, stronger and louder than ever, and it spoke my name. Have you ever stood across from someone who spent years trying to silence you only to realize they can't even speak? Tell me when the power finally shifts in your favor. Do you meet their eyes, or turn your back and walk away? The fallout came fast. Faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, the journalists who had been invited to my execution instead published something closer to a resurrection. Headlines appeared across defense blogs and insider networks. They didn't call it sabotage, not yet, but they didn't have to. The details were too clean, the data too specific, the timing too damning. They called it what it was, a political coup orchestrated through elegant, irrefutable engineering. And behind it all was me, the woman they had once labeled a failure. The Pentagon launched a formal inquiry by the end of the week. My father was suspended from duty pending a full investigation. His security clearance revoked. His office sealed. His silence became his only defense. Julian Caldwell didn't last that long. He was dismissed within 24 hours for professional misconduct and gross negligence. No ceremony, no press release. Just a man escorted off base with a cardboard box in hand, walking past the whiteboard that had condemned him more effectively than any courtroom. And me, I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no victory lap. Just a strange, vast emptiness, like the ringing in your ears after a blast. I walked out of the simulation center alone, the desert sun burning high above me, and all I felt was tired. I had won, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt like something had ended, and something else had just begun. A few days later, my phone rang. I saw the name and hesitated. Leo. My brother. The last thread of family I hadn't completely severed. For a moment, a stupid human moment, I hoped he was calling to ask if I was okay. I hoped he would say, "I'm sorry." I didn't know, but he didn't. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted before I could speak. "You ruined him. You ruined Dad. Do you have any idea how this is going to affect my career, my contacts, my future?" His voice cracked with panic. Not grief, not concern. Panic for himself, for his comfort, for his reflection in a mirror that no longer included our father's shadow. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. Let him rage. Let him indict himself. And when he finally ran out of steam, when his voice dropped into heavy, angry breaths, I said quietly, "You never once asked how I felt. Not 3 years ago. Not now." I ended the call, blocked the number, and just like that, the last illusion of family dissolved. It didn't hurt. Not anymore. It was just quiet. Have you ever reached that place? That silent moment where what used to break you no longer even leaves a scratch? Tell me when you finally walk out of someone's shadow. Do you miss the shade? Or welcome the sun? He arrived unannounced. A low, rumbling sedan kicking up a trail of desert dust as it pulled into the gravel lot outside Garage 17. I was elbow-deep in the undercarriage of a stubborn Ford F-150, my coveralls soaked with sweat, my hands slick with transmission fluid. When I heard the engine cut off, I didn't move. I knew who it was. There are footsteps you memorize even when you spend a lifetime trying to forget them. He wasn't in uniform. No stars on his shoulders. No polished boots. Just a civilian now. Faded slacks, wrinkled button-up eyes sunk deeper into his face than I remembered. The monolith had become a man. A smaller one. A tired one. He stood just outside the shade of the garage as if even the building was reluctant to let him in. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally, his voice, rougher now, aged, unarmored, broke the silence. I just wanted to talk. I wiped my hands on a rag, slow and deliberate, and stepped forward. Not angry. Not braced for war. Just ready. Talk then. He hesitated, eyes searching mine for something that wasn't there anymore. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said. I was trying to protect you. The design was unstable. I had to take steps. I let out a soft laugh. Not amused, exhausted. You didn't protect me? You protected your control, your legacy, your version of history. He flinched ever so slightly. You don't understand the pressure I was under, the weight of the decisions I had to make. No, I said, cutting him off. You don't understand the cost of the decisions you made, because you never had to live with them. I did. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to argue. I reached down and twisted the West Point ring off my finger. The same one he had placed there years ago during graduation with a proud smile that now felt like fiction. The skin beneath it was pale and dented like a scar. I stepped forward and placed the ring into his open palm. It looked smaller there, less significant. I'm giving this back, I said. I don't need your name. I don't need your honors. I'm going to build something better, from the pieces you tried to break. He stared at it, silent. For once, completely still. Then I turned, walked into the garage, grabbed the rope handle and pulled the steel door down behind me. It slammed shut with a heavy final clang. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. Have you ever returned something someone gave you not out of anger but because it never truly belonged to you? Tell me if you had a chance to close the door on the pain they gave you. Would you hesitate? Or would you pull it shut and walk into your own light? Freedom didn't arrive with fireworks. It came in silence. A wide-open kind of quiet I didn't recognize at first. Not the suffocating silence of the war room, or the sharp-edged silence of betrayal, but a stillness that asked nothing of me. A year passed. I didn't return to the Pentagon. I didn't take interviews. I didn't chase a headline or wear vindication like a medal. I stayed in Las Cruces, right where the dust settled after everything fell apart. I bought the bay next to Garage 17 and knocked the wall down myself. It took me 2 months a rented jackhammer and more Advil than I cared to admit. But when I stood in the middle of that new expanded space, hands on hip sawdust in my hair, I realized I wasn't rebuilding. I was repurposing, not for the old mission, for a new one. I called it the Uncle David Project, a tuition-free technical school for female veterans. No uniforms, no rankings, no judgment. Just women like me, strong, scarred, capable, learning to listen to machines, and more importantly, to themselves. We didn't use textbooks. We used real engines, real problems, real tools with chipped paint and stories baked into their metal. Every morning the garage echoed with the clang of steel bursts of laughter and the unmistakable rhythm of purpose. I didn't stand at the front like a professor. I stood beside them, shoulder to shoulder, covered in grease, drinking bad coffee, teaching not by lecture but by example. I told them what my uncle once told me: machines don't lie, and neither should you. Trust your instincts. Trust your hands. One student, Maria, stood out from the beginning. Marine veteran. Brilliant but brittle. She carried herself like someone waiting to be told she didn't belong. I saw myself in her more than I was ready to admit. One afternoon, she was struggling with a transmission so badly misaligned it had defeated two other students. She stared at it, jaw-clenched eyes wet with frustration. I walked over, didn't say a word, just knelt beside her and handed her a tool. A small, worn wrench, my uncle's. The handle was smooth from decades of use. He used this on the first engine he ever trusted, I said quietly. Not because it was special, but because it reminded him to listen. She looked at the wrench, then at me, then back at the engine. And something shifted, not a breakthrough, a beginning. In that moment, I understood something I had never grasped in the military and academia, or in my father's shadow. Legacy isn't what you build for yourself. It's what you give away quietly, piece by piece, until others can build their own. Have you ever handed someone a piece of your past, not to carry but to help them find their future? Tell me, what would you pass down if you finally believed your story had value? It came in a thick manila envelope with the Department of the Navy's seal stamped across the front. No ceremony, no courier. Just the regular mail slot on a Tuesday morning nestled between a stack of invoices and an ad for discounted spark plugs. I opened it at my workbench, grease still on my fingers, coffee cooling beside a busted alternator I'd promised to look at before lunch. Inside was a formal letter written in precise government language. My rank major had been reinstated. All back pay, all benefits, fully restored. Along with the letter was something else in offer. A new R&D division. Independent. Experimental. They wanted me to lead it. Helena's signature sat at the bottom of the page beneath a handwritten note. The Navy needs people like you, Eliza. People who speak truth to power. We never should have let you go. I stared at the words for a long time. Not because I was overwhelmed, not because I felt vindicated, but because I realized something I hadn't expected this offer. This recognition, this long overdue apology, it didn't change anything. Not for me. Not anymore. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside an old wooden box I kept in the back of the garage. The box was filled with a few of Uncle David's belongings, a pocket notebook, a busted compass, the badge from his final NASA project. The letter joined them not as a trophy, but as a memento. A closing page. That afternoon, I didn't call anyone. I didn't announce the news to my students. I just walked out onto the floor and got back to work. There was a crankshaft that needed smoothing and a carburetor acting like it had secrets. Across the bay, Maria and two other students were arguing in that intense, focused way engineers argue about fluid pressure. It was music. Real, human, messy music. I smiled and wiped my hands on a towel, then walked over to lend a hand. The decision not to return wasn't hard. It was just quiet. A quiet I had earned. A quiet that felt like peace. Because I had already returned to something far more meaningful than rank, or clearance, or authority. I had returned to myself. And this version of me didn't need a uniform to feel valid, didn't need a building with her name on the door. This version of me showed up every day in oil-stained boots, holding a wrench, teaching others how to listen to machines, and maybe to themselves. Have you ever received the apology you waited years to hear, only to realize you didn't need it anymore? Tell me, if the world finally gave you back everything it once took, would you take it, or would you let it go and keep what you built instead? It was late afternoon when I saw her again. Maria. She stood near Bay 3, hunched over a stubborn engine block that had resisted every tool and adjustment thrown at it. Her brow was furrowed, jaw-clenched arms braced like she was wrestling the metal into submission. I recognized that posture. I had worn it most of my life. I walked over slowly, not interrupting, just watching. Her hands moved with precision, but her frustration was starting to cloud her focus. "It's fighting me," she muttered, not looking up. "I've realigned the whole damn system twice and it still won't hold pressure." I nodded, crouching beside her. "That's because you're trying to force it," I said gently. You're demanding it obey, but machines don't respond to force. They respond to understanding. She gave me a side glance. So what am I supposed to do? Talk to it. Yes, I said simply. Exactly that. I reached into a drawer behind me and pulled out something wrapped in a piece of cloth, my uncle's old wrench. The same one I used to hold during long nights when doubt felt heavier than metal. The wooden handle was worn smooth, the teeth dulled from decades of stubborn bolts and whispered battles. I unwrapped it and placed it in her hands. This belonged to the man who taught me everything I know, I said. He used to say, "Don't force the machine. Persuade it. Ask it what it needs." She looked down at the wrench, then back at the engine. Her grip softened. Her shoulders relaxed. She took a breath, not the sharp, irritated kind, but the slow inhale of someone choosing to be present. I didn't stay to watch. I walked away and let her figure it out on her own. A few minutes later, I heard it, the clean, steady click of pressure locking into place, followed by the low-content hum of a system finally aligned. She'd done it. Not because I gave her a better tool, but because I helped her trust herself. And that's what the Uncle David Project had become. Not just a school, not just a garage. A place where broken things, machines, people, memories could be understood instead of overpowered. A place where failure wasn't a label, but a step in the conversation. I looked around at the space I had built with my own hands and the people inside it. The laughter, the clatter, the quiet victories. This was my legacy, not a design, not a system, not a clearance level. It was this passing down the courage to listen. Have you ever had the chance to give someone else the belief you once had to build alone? Tell me what would happen if instead of fixing people, we just taught them to listen to the things they thought were broken. The sun was setting when the last student packed up her tools and waved goodbye. The garage door stood open, letting in the warm breath of desert wind and the golden bleed of twilight. I sat on my usual stool near the front, the same old dented metal seat I'd rescued from a salvage yard years ago. From here I could see the full length of Garage 17, every station, every smudge of oil on the concrete, every tool hung carefully back in its place. But more than that, I could feel the echo of the day, the quiet persistence, the problem-solving, the shared laughter over stripped bolts and failed starters. And beneath it all, a hum. Not from a machine. From something deeper. Peace. It didn't arrive loudly. It didn't demand attention. It had no medal, no speech, no moment of applause. It just settled into the space where guilt used to live. I watched the sky shift from burnt orange to deep indigo, the kind of color that only New Mexico knows how to make. The desert, once a place of exile, had become a cathedral. A place where things, engines, wounds, people could be taken apart and rebuilt without shame. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't check it. There was nothing left that couldn't wait. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. Not redemption, not approval, not even closure. I had found something better. Continuity. A student would return tomorrow with a question I hadn't thought of yet. A wrench would slip. A breakthrough would click into place. And through it all, I'd be here. Not as a hero. Not as a cautionary tale. Just as myself. A woman who once stood in a war room while her father tried to erase her. A woman who now stood in her own space surrounded by engines that hummed, students who listened, and silence that no longer hurt. I closed my eyes. The wind stirred a pile of receipts on my desk, rustling them like pages in a story long since written. It sounded almost like music. Not the triumphant kind. Not the tragic kind. Something quieter. Something earned. A symphony of sweat, resilience, and starting over. Have you ever realized that the life you rebuilt brick by brick, scar by scar, was the one you were always meant to live? Tell me when the noise finally fades. What does your silence sound like? Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones no one hears. I didn't need a courtroom or a stage to reclaim my name. I just needed the truth and the courage to stand in it. If you're a parent watching this, ask yourself, are you nurturing your child's voice or rewriting their story to fit your own legacy? And if you're someone who's ever been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced, I see you. You are not alone. Your story matters even if no one claps. Have you ever lived through something like this? A moment where someone tried to erase your worth? Tell me in the comments, what did you do and what did you learn from it? If this story meant something to you like it did to me, please like, subscribe, and share. Because sometimes the quietest revenge is simply being free. Thank you for listening.